The film Apollo 13 begins its narrative on a significant day in history, July 20th, 1969, set in the warm and inviting home of astronaut Jim Lovell. This particular day is forever imprinted in the historical records as the day when the Apollo 11 astronauts accomplished the first ever moonwalk. Jim Lovell, along with several other families who have close ties with NASA, gather together to watch this monumental event unfold. As he watches the moonwalk, Jim can't help but reflect on his journey of circling the moon during the Apollo 8 mission. He ponders over the thrilling prospect of one day stepping foot on the moon himself. Meanwhile, his wife Marilyn wrestles with her concerns about Jim setting off on another potentially dangerous space mission. A few months later, Jim receives news that stirs up a mix of excitement and anxiety. He and his crew have been advanced to the main crew for the forthcoming Apollo 13 mission. This unexpected promotion is due to an ear infection that has temporarily sidelined one of the original crew members. Despite Marilyn voicing her worries about the fast-tracked schedule and the unlucky number 13 associated with the mission, Jim remains unwavering in his confidence about their readiness. Jim works closely with his crew members, Fred Haise and Ken Mattingly. Together, they show complete preparedness for their mission, ensuring every aspect of their preparations is meticulously covered. However, just before the launch, Marilyn suddenly expresses her doubts about the flight. Jim, in his comforting manner, persuades her that she will miss out on a remarkable spectacle if she lets her fears overcome her. After their sincere conversation, Jim and his crew attend a small press conference. Here, they discuss the various instances where the number 13 is associated with the mission, such as launching at 1300 hours and 13 minutes and orbiting the moon on April 13th. In an unexpected twist, Jim announces that this will also be his final mission, leaving both the press and the crew surprised. Just days before the mission, the flight surgeon reveals some disturbing news. A member of the backup crew has contracted measles, posing a significant risk of infection to the primary crew. As Ken Mattingly has not previously had measles, there is a considerable chance of him falling ill during the mission. Jim is faced with a tough choice: either replace Ken with the backup crew member, Jack Swigert, or postpone the entire Apollo 13 crew to a later mission. Jack receives the news with joy, while Ken is heartbroken upon hearing it from both Jim and Fred. Despite the last-minute change, the crew continues their training in the simulator with Swigert. They harbor some reservations about Jack's piloting abilities compared to Ken's. Nonetheless, Jim assures everyone that they will be adequately prepared for the launch. On the day of the launch, Ken watches from a distance as the rocket takes off. He is accompanied by Marilyn Lovell and Mary, Fred Hayes' wife, who are present at the launch site. The launch is successful, providing a sense of relief to Marilyn and Mary as the Saturn V rocket, carrying their husbands, successfully enters space. Eventually, the crew accomplishes the task of docking the command module with the Lunar Excursion Module, LEM, thanks to Swigert's proficient piloting skills. The mission then proceeds towards the moon. They capture a video from inside the craft, but due to a prevailing belief that moon missions lack excitement, none of the television networks broadcast the transmission. Shortly after the video feed, the crew performs routine maintenance tasks on the ship. Jim Swigert is assigned the task of stirring the oxygen tanks. Suddenly, a loud bang echoes through the spacecraft, causing it to lose stability. System buttons illuminate, and the oxygen tanks begin to malfunction. Control, led by Gene Kranz, swiftly takes action from the ground, attempting to solve the problem. Amidst the chaos, Lovell reports that the service module is leaking oxygen. At the insistence of ECOM member Cy Liebergott, they considered shutting down the fuel cells to prevent further leakage. However, this decision comes with a trade-off. If the fuel cells are closed, they cannot be reopened, and the moon landing will be aborted. Jim Lovell expresses some apprehension, but the crew ultimately proceeds with the shutdown, only to witness the oxygen level in the command module continue to decline rapidly. With only 15 minutes of oxygen left, they initiate an emergency transfer, moving the flight computer's data and the astronauts themselves to the LEM, which serves as a lifeboat. The crew rapidly goes through the 3-hour power-up procedure for the LEM, relying on the data stored in the Odyssey's flight computer and assistance from the ground crew at Mission Control to ensure the accuracy of their course calculations. Eventually, the crew finds safety within the LEM, and control is re-established with the Odyssey. Gene Kranz and his team deliberate on the best course of action to bring the astronauts back home. While some propose a direct abort by turning the ship around and heading straight back to Earth using the command module, Gene deems it too risky to ignite its engine as they are uncertain about the extent of damage caused by the reported explosion. The plan involves utilizing the moon's gravity to slingshot the spacecraft, and upon its return trajectory, they will activate the LEM's engine to guide them back home. The engineers who designed the LEM express concerns that their craft was not designed for such a scenario. Nevertheless, Jean insists that it's the only feasible option they have. In the meantime, Marilyn Lovell strives to maintain her composure and strength for the sake of her family. At one juncture, Henry Hurt, the media spokesperson for NASA, approaches Marilyn with a request. He asks if the news stations could install an antenna on her front lawn. She firmly refuses, stating that they can communicate directly with Jim once he safely returns home. Aboard the spacecraft, the crew embarks on a journey into the dark side of the moon, eventually emerging on the side bathed in light. Despite the excitement of Haise and Swigert, upon seeing their intended landing site below, and Jim's contemplation of walking on the moon's surface, Jim reminds them that their primary focus should still be on preparing for their journey back home. During this critical period, Mission Control discovers that there are only 45 hours of power remaining on the spacecraft, which is insufficient for the astronauts to make it back home. However, John Aaron corrects this information, emphasizing that they are consuming more power than initially calculated, and it will be completely depleted within 15 hours. John insists that the crew needs to shut down almost all systems, including their navigational computer, and reduce power usage to 12 amps. Jean approves the plan but instructs the team to conduct further research, including simulator sessions, to develop a power-up procedure for re-entry. Ken Mattingly, who had been in isolation at his home and was unaware of the complications that had arisen in the mission, is urgently summoned. Upon his arrival, he immediately immerses himself in work, operating the simulator. Ken is of the firm belief that by eliminating superfluous procedures from the checklist, they might be able to bring the astronauts back with the limited power available. He instructs the simulator team to replicate the exact conditions and equipment as those aboard the Odyssey, dedicating countless hours without breaks to devise a procedure. Soon after, another problem surfaces when it is discovered that all 3 men inside the Lunar Excursion Module, LEM, are consuming more oxygen and producing more carbon dioxide than anticipated. Fred Haise realizes that he made an error in his calculations by only accounting for oxygen reserves for himself and Jim, assuming they would be the only ones using the LEM. The ground team realizes that the LEM filters are circular, while the only other filters on the spacecraft for the command module are square. They form a team to create a filtration system using the limited supplies available on board. On the spacecraft, a brief argument ensues when Jack raises concerns about a distant re-entry factor, and Fred suggests that Jack caused the accident by stirring the oxygen tanks. Lovell intervenes, urging them to put aside blame and arguments, emphasizing that it will lead them nowhere. Just as the CO2 saturation light illuminates, indicating a critical issue, Houston contacts the crew, alerting them to the oxygen problem. They swiftly collaborate to assemble the filter designed by the ground team. The procedure proves successful, effectively purifying the air supply inside the ship. When it becomes evident that the crew needs to perform a manual burn to correct the trajectory for Earth re-entry, Jim and the team execute a challenging 30-second burn using rudimentary physics. Since the course computer had to be shut down to conserve battery power, they rely on one of the LM's windows, keeping Earth aligned in it for navigation. The 3 astronauts work together to pilot the ship, and the burn is executed successfully. With their trajectory corrected, Jim and the crew eagerly await the completion of the power-up procedure, but they are informed that it is still being finalized. However, there is a glimmer of hope when Mission Control mentions that Ken Mattingly is working on the issue. The crew feels the cold creeping in since the heaters had to be deactivated, and Haise begins to experience illness and a moderate fever. Ken has optimized his work to the best of his abilities, yet the procedure still exceeds the desired amperage by 4 amps. It is at this point that Ken suggests redirecting some of the surplus power from the Lunar Excursion Module, LEM, back into the command module. Although there will be some power loss during the transfer, it is found that the available amperage is sufficient to complete the procedure without compromising the system's power. Ken and his colleagues swiftly proceed to Mission Control, bringing along the procedure. Ken assists the exhausted Jack Swigert in powering up the systems, while Jim and Fred add additional weight to the command module pod to compensate for the lack of moon rock samples that were originally planned for. With Ken's guidance, Jack successfully gets the Odyssey systems operational once again. Subsequently, the crew ejects the service module from the spacecraft. As it drifts away, the astronauts observe and comment on the damage. An entire panel of the craft has been blown out, potentially affecting the heat shield of the command module pod, creating a new potential problem as the Odyssey prepares to re-enter Earth's atmosphere, which may expose it to extreme temperatures it cannot withstand. Eventually, the LEM is detached, and the crew gets ready for re-entry. For a brief moment, Jack considers that Jim will pilot the Odyssey himself, but Jim relinquishes control to Jack, explaining that he had only occupied the pilot's seat out of habit. Meanwhile, around the world, numerous individuals anxiously await news of the three men's safe return. Marilyn's friends and relatives gather at her home, watching the news coverage. As the men commence their re-entry, communication is lost, and a countdown of 3 minutes begins, the average time it takes for astronauts to recover from blackout. However, after 3 minutes, no communication is received when Ken Mattingly contacts the crew. The time stretches agonizingly to 4.5 minutes before suddenly Jim Lovell's voice is heard, accompanied by a video feed showing the capsule with its parachutes deployed. The men are swiftly rescued and brought aboard the USS Iwo Jima, receiving cheers from the numerous crew members. The movie comes to its conclusion as Jim tells us in a voiceover that their mission was a successful failure, highlighting their safe return despite not reaching the moon. It is also revealed that the explosion was caused by a damaged coil in the oxygen tank, a minor defect that had been identified 2 years before Lovell assumed command control of the ship. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.